The Effective Executive by Peter F. Drucker. Picture this: a humble farmer and failed shopkeeper who freely admitted he wasn't the brightest guy in any room. When fate thrust Harry S. Truman into the presidency during the dying days of World War II, nobody expected greatness. Yet this Missouri everyman became one of America's most impactful leaders. Truman had dreams when he took office. Big dreams about finishing the social reforms that war had interrupted. That's what fired him up, what he planned to pour his energy into. Then he paused and asked himself one deceptively simple question, a question that would reshape not just his presidency, but the entire post-war world. He didn't ask, "What do I want to do?" Instead, he asked, "What needs to be done?" The answer hit him like a freight train. The world lay in ruins. Foreign policy couldn't wait. So this man, who knew practically nothing about international affairs, started each morning getting schooled by his secretaries of state and defense. He shelved his pet projects and zeroed in on the one contribution only a president could make. What followed? The Marshall Plan, which didn't just rebuild Europe, but ignited 50 years of worldwide prosperity. The strategy that contained communism. A legacy that screams effectiveness. Truman's transformation isn't just a feel-good history tale. It's the living, breathing embodiment of one of the most powerful books ever written on getting things done, The Effective Executive, by the legendary Peter F. Drucker. Drucker wasn't some ivory tower professor theorizing about management. For over 65 years, he sat in the rooms where it happened, advising top CEOs, presidents, and nonprofit leaders. He saw what worked and what flopped in the real world. After observing countless leaders in action, he reached a conclusion that shocked even him. Effectiveness has almost nothing to do with charisma, brainpower, or raw talent. In all those decades, he never encountered a single person who was born effective, not one natural. Instead, he discovered something far more encouraging. Effectiveness is a discipline. It's a habit. It's a collection of straightforward, learnable practices that anyone, yes, including you, wherever you are right now, can master. This book has sold millions of copies and guided leaders at powerhouse companies like Amazon, Intel, and General Electric for one beautifully simple reason: its lessons work, and they never get old. So here's what I'm offering you today. By the time we finish this journey together, you'll understand the 5 essential practices that separate the perpetually busy from the genuinely effective. You'll discover the secret to transforming your hard work and good intentions into actual, measurable results. This isn't about grinding harder. It's about working smarter on what truly counts. This is the art of getting the right things done. What exactly is an executive? You probably imagine some suit in a corner office running a massive corporation. But Peter Drucker painted a much broader and frankly more empowering picture. He said an executive is any knowledge worker, manager, or individual contributor whose work materially affects their organization's performance and results. In today's world, that's practically everyone. The student coordinating a group presentation. The developer writing code. The junior marketing person crafting a social media strategy. If you're expected to use your brain more than your hands to accomplish something, congratulations. You're an executive, and your job is to be effective. But here's the catch. The very fabric of modern life seems engineered to sabotage our effectiveness. Drucker identified 4 brutal realities constantly pulling us off course. First, your time isn't really yours. It belongs to everyone else. Your phone pings, a friend needs help. Deadlines appear out of nowhere. Second, you're stuck in constant firefighting mode, dealing with today's crisis instead of thinking about tomorrow. Third, your contribution only matters if others use it, but those people are often in different departments or areas where you have zero control. Finally, you're trapped inside your bubble, your school, company, or team, slowly losing touch with the outside world, which is the only place where results actually exist. We fall into the busy trap. We confuse activity with accomplishment. We become incredibly efficient at doing things that might not matter at all. Drucker gives a perfect example: an engineering team that churns out gorgeous, detailed blueprints for completely the wrong product. That's efficiency perfected with zero effectiveness. So how do we escape? How do we become effective in a world designed to scatter our attention? Drucker says it starts with the first of 5 practices, the absolute foundation of effectiveness, learning to manage your time. But not how you might expect. Effective people don't begin with planning. They start with something far more humbling. They find out where their time actually goes. Drucker tells this fascinating story about a company chairman dead certain he split his time equally across 3 areas: time with senior executives, time with major customers, and time on community work. This guy prided himself on his memory, so they ran an experiment. For 6 weeks, his secretary tracked everything he did in detail. The results blindsided him. The record showed he spent almost no time on those 3 key areas. His memory had basically lied to him, showing him doing what he thought he should be doing. Reality? He spent most days acting like a dispatcher, chasing orders and calling the plant about tiny details that were running fine anyway. He was interfering, not helping. It took several more time logs to finally convince him that when it comes to time, memory is worthless. You need the record. This is step 1 for anyone serious about effectiveness. For a few weeks, log your time, not from memory at day's end, but right as you're doing it. A simple notepad works fine. The goal isn't self-judgment, it's truth. Once you have that record, Drucker says you move to step 2, managing your time, by asking some diagnostic questions. First, look at your time log and ask about every activity. What would happen if this were not done at all? If the honest answer is nothing, stop doing it. You'd be amazed how much of what we do is pure habit, stuff nobody would miss. Second question. Which of these activities could someone else do just as well or better? This isn't about dodging work. It's recognizing that as an executive, you're meant to do things only you can do. The only way to reach your most important work is by releasing everything else. The third, and perhaps gutsiest question, is asking people around you, what do I do that wastes your time? Asking this takes real humility, but it's one of the fastest ways to boost your entire team's effectiveness. After eliminating the time wasters, you reach the final, most crucial step of time management, consolidating what Drucker calls your discretionary time into large, uninterrupted blocks. He argues that any meaningful knowledge work, writing a report, thinking through strategy, preparing a major presentation, needs a substantial, uninterrupted chunk of time. Trying to do it in 15-minute bursts between meetings is pointless. You spend the whole time just remembering where you stopped. As he puts it, small dribs and drabs of time are no time at all. Drucker shares the story of a wildly successful bank president he worked with. Their meetings always lasted exactly 90 minutes, never more, never less. When Drucker asked why, the president explained he'd discovered his attention span maxed out around 90 minutes. Any longer, he'd start repeating himself. Any shorter, he couldn't dive deep enough to truly understand an issue. During those 90 minutes, 0 interruptions. His secretary had ironclad instructions, no calls except from the President of the United States or his wife. As he said, the president rarely calls, and my wife knows better. I have yet to come across a crisis which could not wait 90 minutes. This man had cracked the code. He consolidated his discretionary time into usable blocks, where he could be genuinely effective. Whether you do this by working from home one morning weekly, or scheduling all meetings on 2 days while keeping 3 free for deep work, the principle stays the same. Find your discretionary time, then guard it fiercely. Mastering time is foundational, but it's only the start. Once you've carved out these productive blocks, you face a deeper question. What do you actually do with that time? This brings us to Drucker's second practice, focusing on contribution. The effective executive constantly looks up from their work and outward toward goals. They're always asking, what can I contribute that will significantly affect the performance and results of the institution I serve? Notice the wording. Not what's my job, not what are my tasks, but what can I contribute? This tiny shift changes everything. It moves your focus from effort to results. from your narrow silo to the whole organization's performance. Drucker tells of a management consultant who'd start every new assignment by asking senior executives one by one, "What do you do that justifies your being on the payroll?" Most would answer with their authority or effort. They'd say, "I run the accounting department," or "I have 850 people under me." They focused downward on what they controlled. But a rare few answered differently. They'd say, "It's my job to give our managers the information they need for right decisions," or "I'm responsible for finding out what products customers will want tomorrow." These people focused upward on their contribution to the whole. They were the ones with true top management mindsets, regardless of their actual titles. This focus on contribution can completely transform a job. Drucker gives this wonderful example of a new vice president at a large bank, heading what everyone considered a boring back-office department called agency. This department handled clerical tasks like maintaining stockholder records and mailing dividend checks. All about precision and efficiency, nothing exciting. But this new vice president asked, what could this department contribute? He realized his work put him in direct contact with top financial executives at the bank's biggest corporate customers, the very people deciding where to do all their banking. He saw his department's greatest potential wasn't as paper pushers, but as a sales and marketing force for the entire bank. By focusing on contribution, he transformed a forgotten corner into a growth engine. Drucker explains every organization needs contributions in 3 key areas. First, direct results, sales in business, patient care in hospitals. Second, building and reinforcing values. What does this organization stand for? There must be standards, shared commitments. He tells this beautiful story of a new hospital administrator who, after a long meeting where everyone thought a decision was settled, heard a nurse suddenly ask, "Would this have satisfied Nurse Bryan?" Nurse Bryan had retired years earlier. She'd never even been a supervisor. But whenever a patient care decision came up on her floor, she'd always ask, "Are we doing the best we can to help this patient?" Over time, the entire hospital adopted what they called Nurse Bryan's rule. The standard she set, her commitment to a value, outlived her and kept making demands on people technically her superiors. That's a contribution of value. The third contribution area is building and developing tomorrow's people. An organization that can't produce its own future leaders has failed. The executive who focuses on contribution naturally develops people. Because they set high standards, they demand excellence not for ego but for the task. And people, especially knowledge workers, grow according to the demands they make on themselves. So you've taken control of your time and oriented yourself toward contribution. But how do you actually deliver? You can't do it alone. You need to mobilize the strengths of people around you. This leads to the third practice, making strength productive. This, to me, ranks among the most profound and humane ideas in all of management thinking. The effective executive knows you can't build on weakness. To achieve results, you must use all available strengths, your colleagues' strengths, your boss's strengths, and your own strengths. These strengths are the real opportunities. An organization's unique purpose is making human strength productive while rendering human weakness irrelevant. Drucker opens this discussion with one of history's greatest leadership stories. During the Civil War's darkest days, the Union Army kept struggling. President Lincoln had appointed a series of well-rounded generals without obvious flaws. They kept losing. Meanwhile, Confederate General Robert E. Lee staffed his army completely differently. Every one of his generals had monumental, glaring weaknesses. But Lee saw those failings as irrelevant. He knew each had one area of incredible strength, and that's the only thing he used. Finally, Lincoln learned this lesson. He found a general rumored to drink too much. Certainly not well-rounded, but he knew how to plan and lead winning campaigns. His name was Ulysses S. Grant. When people complained about Grant's drinking, Lincoln famously replied, "If I knew his brand, I'd send a barrel or so to some other generals." Lincoln chose Grant for his strength, not his lack of weakness, and that decision turned the war. This is effective staffing's core principle. Don't look for people to avoid weakness. Look for people to maximize strength. Drucker believed the whole idea of a well-rounded person is a recipe for mediocrity. He said, "Strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys." The executive, always worried about what people can't do, is weak themselves, probably threatened by others' strength. But as Drucker wisely notes, no executive has ever suffered because his subordinates were strong and effective. So how do you practice this? Drucker lays out 4 clear rules. First, guard against the impossible job. These are jobs that look logical on paper but defeat one good person after another. Drucker's rule is simple. Any job that's defeated 2 or 3 people in a row, even though each performed well before, must be assumed unfit for human beings. It must be redesigned. Often these jobs demand a mix of temperaments rarely found in one person, like needing both intense analytical detail work and highly empathetic people skills. Second rule, make every job demanding and big. This especially matters for a young person's first job. It should be big enough to challenge them and let them show what they can really do. Too many organizations give young people small, safe, boring jobs, then wonder why they lose their fire and turn cynical. Drucker says, they have only themselves to blame. They quenched the fire by making the young man's job too small. Third rule, effective executives start by thinking about what a person can do, not what the job requires. This means they think about people and their strengths long before a position needs filling. This is why traditional performance reviews so often fail. They're designed by psychologists to find weaknesses, diagnose what's wrong. An executive's job is the opposite. Find what's right. So an effective review asks 4 different questions. 1. What has this person done well? 2. What, therefore, are they likely able to do well? 3. What do they need to learn or acquire to get full benefit from their strength? 4. And finally, a gut check. If I had a son or daughter, would I want them working under this person? If the answer is no, you know there's a fundamental character or integrity problem, which Drucker says is the one weakness that can't be overlooked. Fourth and final rule, to get strength, you must tolerate weakness. You don't hire a world-class opera singer for her charming personality. You hire her because she can sing. The manager's job is tolerating her tantrums, so she can deliver that performance. Demanding people be good at everything is a recipe for well-rounded but ultimately mediocre performers. This principle of making strength productive doesn't just apply to subordinates, it also applies to your boss. This answers the age-old question, how do I manage my boss? The secret, Drucker reveals, is that effective executives make their boss's strengths productive. This isn't flattery, it's recognizing your boss is human, with strengths and limitations. Your job is enabling them to do what they do well, which in turn makes you effective. So ask, what can my boss do really well? What does he need from me to perform? Then present your contribution in a way that plays to that strength. Is your boss a reader or a listener? It's simple but critical. A reader needs a report to study before meaningful discussion. Talking first wastes time. A listener needs to hear you verbally work through issues before they can grasp them. Handing them a dense report first is equally useless. Figuring this out and adapting is a simple way to make your boss, and therefore yourself, far more effective. You've mastered your time, you're focused on contribution, you're building on strength, but even with all that, demands will always exceed available time. There are always more important things than you can possibly accomplish. This brings us to Drucker's 4th practice, what he calls effectiveness's secret, if there is one. First things first. Effective executives do first things first, and they do one thing at a time. This sounds simple but proves incredibly difficult. It requires courage to set not just priorities, but what Drucker calls posteriorities, tasks you decide not to do. This is where most people fail. They create long priority lists, then try doing a little of everything. Result? Nothing truly important gets the large, consolidated time chunk it needs for excellence. Drucker tells this incredible story about a pharmaceutical CEO. When he took over, it was a small, single-country firm. When he retired 11 years later, it was a global leader. How? For the first several years, he worked exclusively on one thing: building a world-class research organization. Once finished, he turned full attention to a second task: building an international company. In his final years, he concentrated on developing a long-term healthcare strategy. He built a massive, successful global enterprise by having the discipline to focus on only one major task at a time. This, Drucker says, is the secret of people who seem to do so many things. They don't. They do one thing at a time, but they finish it. As a result, they need much less time than the rest of us constantly juggling. To practice this concentration, the first rule is constantly sloughing off yesterday. Effective executives periodically review all programs and activities and ask one simple, brutal question: if we were not already doing this, would we, knowing what we know now, go into it? If the answer is anything but an unconditional yes, they drop it, or at least stop pouring more resources into it. The easy things to abandon are total failures. Everyone sees they don't work. The hardest things to abandon, Drucker warns, are yesterday's successes. These are projects that built the company, products everyone loves, but that no longer deliver real productivity. They linger, consuming time and energy from your best people, who should be working on tomorrow's opportunities. Drucker points to chemical giant DuPont, which for decades has systematically abandoned products and processes before they decline. This discipline of clearing out the old is the only way to free resources for creating the new. This leads to the final practice, where everything comes together. You've managed time, identified your contribution, mobilized strengths, and set priorities. Now you must act. You must choose. This is the fifth and final practice: the elements of an effective decision. A decision, Drucker says, is a judgment. It's choosing between alternatives, and it's rarely choosing between right and wrong. It is, at best, choosing between almost right and probably wrong. Most books on decision-making say first, find the facts. Drucker says this is completely wrong. Effective executives know you don't start with facts. You start with opinions. Why? Because there are no facts unless you first have a criterion of relevance. You need a hypothesis, an opinion, to even know which facts to look for. People claiming they start with facts are often just looking for facts fitting their predetermined conclusion. Since you start with opinions, the first rule of decision-making is surprising. One does not make a decision unless there is disagreement. He tells this classic story about Alfred P. Sloan, legendary General Motors head. Sloan was in a meeting with top executives and said, "Gentlemen, I take it we are all in complete agreement on the decision here." Everyone nodded. Then, Sloan continued, "I propose we postpone further discussion until our next meeting to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about." Sloan knew good decisions aren't made by unanimous consent. They're made based on clashing views, dialogue between different perspectives, and choice between different judgments. Disagreement is essential for three reasons. First, it's the only safeguard against the decision-maker becoming prisoner to organizational preconceptions. Second, disagreement alone provides decision alternatives. A decision without an alternative is a desperate gamble, because if it proves wrong, you have nowhere to go. Third, disagreement is needed to stimulate imagination and create new, creative solutions. The effective decision-maker doesn't assume one person's right and another's wrong. They assume anyone disagreeing sees a different reality and is concerned with a different problem. Their first job is understanding that other reality. Drucker lays out 5 elements of effective decision process. 1. First, ask if this is a generic problem or a unique, exceptional one. Generic problems always need a rule, a principle. Most problems executives face are generic. Treating them as unique events is the most common decision-making mistake, leading to frustration and futility. 2. Second, you must define the boundary conditions. These are specifications the decision must satisfy to be effective. What minimum goals must it achieve? If the decision doesn't satisfy these conditions, it'll be ineffective, no matter how brilliant it seems. 3. Third, think through what is right, not what is acceptable. You'll make compromises eventually, but you can't make the right compromise unless you first know what right looks like. 4. Fourth, build action into the decision from the start. A decision isn't a decision until someone has responsibility to carry it out, with a deadline. Until then, it's just good intentions. You must answer. Who needs to know about this decision? What action is needed? Who takes it? And is the action appropriate to the people's capacities who must carry it out? 5. Finally, the fifth element is building feedback into the decision process to test it against reality. Drucker says military organizations learned long ago that only reliable feedback is going and seeing for yourself. An officer giving orders doesn't just trust reports. They go to the front line to see if it was carried out. In our age of data and computers, this matters more than ever. You must get out of your office and see reality yourself. And with that, we've come full circle. These 5 practices, managing time, focusing on contribution, making strength productive, concentrating on priorities, and making effective decisions, aren't tricks or techniques. They're habits of mind. They form a coherent whole, an integrated discipline. This is Drucker's ultimate message. Effectiveness isn't something you're born with. It's a set of practices. And practices can always be learned. As we step back and look at The Effective Executive, it's astonishing, realizing it was first published in 1967. In a world obsessed with the latest productivity app, the newest life hack, the next big thing, Drucker's wisdom feels more urgent and relevant than ever. Why? Because he doesn't offer tools. He offers a mindset. Our modern world screams for attention. It pulls us in 1,000 directions, promising if we just get more organized, just find the right system, we can finally get everything done. Drucker's quiet, profound wisdom offers a different path. He tells us the goal isn't getting everything done. The goal is getting the right things done. And that's a fundamentally different challenge. For me, the most powerful and liberating idea in this entire book is that effectiveness is a discipline that can be learned. It's not a gift reserved for a select few. It's not about personality. The quiet introvert can be just as effective as the charismatic extrovert. This is an incredibly democratic and hopeful idea. It means the ability to make real impact is within reach for every single one of us, provided we're willing to do the work, to practice the habits. The concept of setting posteriorities, deciding what tasks not to tackle, is a true superpower in the 21st century. We live in an age of infinite choice, infinite information, infinite demands. The person who succeeds isn't the one juggling the most balls, but the one with courage to let most of them drop, so they can focus on the 1 or 2 that truly matter. That requires courage more than intelligence, and it's a lesson that can change the entire trajectory of a young person's life and career. Finally, the idea of making your boss's strengths productive is a secret key to success almost never taught in school or the workplace. Young, ambitious people often see their boss as an obstacle to reform or a limitation to overcome. Drucker shows us a better way. See them as human, understand their strengths, and frame your own contribution in a way that allows them to shine. When you make your boss successful, you create conditions for your own success. It's a profound shift from a mindset of conflict to one of contribution. So how can you, as a young person on the cusp of adult life, begin applying these timeless principles right now? It doesn't require a grand plan. It starts with small, simple actions. First, just for 1 week, I challenge you to track your time. Carry a small notebook or use a phone app, and just be an honest observer of where your hours go. At week's end, look at the record and ask yourself, is this how I wanted to spend my time? That single act of awareness is the first step toward taking control. Second, next time you have a big school project or work task, take 2 minutes before starting and ask Drucker's question, what is the single most important contribution I can make to this effort? This will shift your focus from simply getting the task done to delivering real value, and people will notice the difference. Third, identify one thing you're naturally good at, something that seems to come a little easier to you than others. Maybe you're a great writer, clear communicator, or natural organizer. Find one opportunity this week, no matter how small, to intentionally use that strength to help your team, class, or family. Lean into what you do well. Peter Drucker's greatest gift wasn't giving us complex theories, but revealing simple, powerful truths hiding in plain sight. He showed us that people who truly shape the world aren't always the most brilliant or talented. They're the ones who've mastered the quiet, consistent discipline of getting the right things done. They're the effective ones. And that path, with all its challenges and rewards, is open to you, starting today. That brings us to the end of our journey through the effective executive. We've explored the core ideas today, but a map isn't the territory. Real value comes from walking the path yourself. If these lessons sparked something in you, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading Drucker isn't just about absorbing information. It's like having a conversation with one of the wisest mentors who ever lived. The link is waiting for you in the description below. Also, if you enjoyed this deep dive and want to continue exploring books that have shaped leaders and thinkers, please take a moment to subscribe and give this episode a like. It tells us we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next exploration. Let's keep learning and growing together.